Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 212. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have back with us the internationally acclaimed comic book inker and children's book illustrator, JL Straw.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm good. I wouldn't quite call it internationally acclaimed.
But it's
Thank
true.
you.
It's true, right? Yeah. Because I gotta say, I've been looking forward to this interview for a while because JL, you were my very first guest on my very first episode
That is
almost 3 years ago.
wow,
So
that long.
it's been, it was February
Yeah.
2020. Yeah.
Wow.
So
A lot's
yeah,
happened since then.
a lot has happened since then. Yes. So I gotta say, because I've been following your work since over the last few years, and I've been seeing that you've always had these new projects popping up,
Mm.
But so JL, talk to us a bit about what you've been up to over the last couple of years of your projects.
Well, I've been doing inking for a publisher who I think they're based in Germany, which is the
Okay.
Spin in Mundi, which I found out is Latin for essentially the end of the world kind of stuff. I didn't know that, and then I had to look it up. And they do like horror, supernatural comics. So I've inked with them for a number of years. Then I worked with a Twitch streamer on a custom map for the game Among Us, which
Oh,
was super
wow.
fun, and that was last year. And then last year, I worked on a children's book which came out in August this year. So yeah, it's been a busy couple of years. Although this year I've not had any projects on the go, so I'm kind of focusing on some writing where I can. Finally get some of my comic writing done. But
Because I
yeah,
remember, because last time you were on, you were talking about this big epic project you were working on,
yes, still working on it. Still
right?
working on it.
Yeah.
It's
And
gonna be a
so
while.
uh, so talk to us a bit about how you mentioned what was the difference between working on a children's book as compared to working on a map for a video game.
Um, there are similarities obviously because it's drawing.
Right,
And I had to do the whole process. So when it's with comics, you kind of do one step in the process.
right,
But for the game and for the children's book, you're kind of doing the whole process. So working, I think the biggest difference is when you're working on a game, you're working with a team. So you have the developers, the game designers, and then the artists. So it's very, I think there were like 10 of us working on that.
mm,
Um, and then we had a deadline, which was crazy. And then, so I think that's sort of the biggest difference. And then with the children's book, it's just me on my own.
right,
And then because with the game, you're not really interpreting a story. You're creating what they call assets for like the background, the characters, things that they're going to be interacting with. So it's not so much about the storytelling. Although I try to inject a little storytelling elements in there, but with the children's book, and I guess that's also the difference because as a comic artist, I normally do the inking, I don't do the penciling. So I'm
right.
not having to interpret the script. But with a children's book, typically it's just one artist and they're doing everything. So you have to interpret the script yourself and kind of figure out how you want to compose the scene, and all those kind of things, and just make sure you're actually drawing what you're reading is the simplest way to put it. Like the author will say, the character is having a drink. So it's like, okay, I draw a character having a drink. So it's pretty simple that way.
How does that relationship work? Is it fairly contractual, or is there almost like a peer-to-peer partnership situation going on there?
For that one, that was pay for hire. And again, I was going through a third party. So I was hired by a studio who was working with the author. So
Okay,
I didn't have any direct um, uh, any direct communication with the author. It's all through the editor.
Hmm.
So if I wanted to make a change, I would have to let the editor know. They would go back to the author, and then he'll come back and say, "Nope, the author wants it like this." So it's like,
Right.
oh, okay. But with the game, there's a lot more creative input. So that it was an interesting process because with the game, I was kind of waiting for them to finalize the layout of the map, and it had a like a submarine themed or
Mm-mm.
underwater theme, and so the game designers had decided, okay, this is going to be this room and this is going to be this room. But when it now came to actually doing the art for those rooms, I was like, I should probably have had more input into the design stage because when I started researching like what should go in some of these rooms, it's like, yeah, this room is too small for what the room would actually do in real life. And it's like, if I'd been a part of that early creative process, then I could have had some input and influence sort of the design of the map. So that was an interesting learning experience, but still, like even after that, I still had a lot of input in terms of some of the tasks that the characters would have to do around the map, and I also had to oversee a team of artists, so I had to provide them with some creative direction. So yeah,
So talk to so a couple questions for you.
yep.
The first one regarding the children's book piece
Mm.
is, how did you have a studio find you, or did you submit yourself as like some sort of CV or application to say, hey, if you're looking for work, I'm available?
I joined a website basically for freelancers. They post their portfolio, and any people looking to hire artists, they would go to the website, look at the available artists, and contact the one that they want to work with. In this case, I had signed up for the website, and then the editor, he contacted me to say that he's got a children's book and he wants me to be one of the artists considered. So he's going to put forward a number of artists to the
Mm,
author for them to choose. So
right.
I submitted a piece of art that I had been working on, sent that along. That was submitted to the author. Then the author came back to say, I want to work with this artist, which happened to be me. So I worked with them on a book in 2019. And then when she had a second book she wanted to do, they came back to me because she wanted the art to be the same. She wanted to work with the same artist so that
Right.
it's like one book in a series. So she came back for the second book. The editor contacted me to say the next book is ready to go. So, so it's pretty much like that. There are different websites you can sign up for as an artist. Put your portfolio on there. There's another one I've signed up to, and they will assign artists to jobs, from what I understand. So
Right.
here clients will come to him, you know, with their project briefs, and then he will kind of match the brief with the artist. So yeah, there are websites for that for freelancers that they
Mm.
can go to.
So it does bring up a good question for you, is that because of the world we live in now where it's so easy to self-publish, would you recommend other potential children's book illustrators or artists to go through that system, or just reach out directly on some of these Facebook groups to say, hey, I'm looking for an illustrator? What would
Um,
be your recommendation?
like I've been a part of a few Facebook groups for artists and writers, which is it's supposed to be the place where you can connect with writers.
Mm,
But I do find that on sites like that, the level of authors you're getting, they're not the kind that have a big budget. And
mm,
even the one I went through didn't have the biggest budget in the world. So I I do feel like if you're starting out, it's a good place to go because you can get some experience. But just be aware that the pay oftentimes isn't great. Like to find a good paying client is not the norm. It's hard to come by. Not that they're not there, but yeah, they're harder to find. And especially if you're an experienced artist or an established artist, the Facebook groups are not necessarily the best places to go because, again, the artists you're competing with usually, I mean, from my experience, they're not normally at that professional level yet. The clientele kind of matches that. So the clientele are authors just starting out. They don't have the biggest budget. So I think my advice is even, you can still go on places like Facebook or other freelance sites, but I do feel like if you really want to make it as a career artist in the children's illustration market, then your best bet is probably to find an agent or to submit to publishers,
Right.
mainstream publishers and such, who have the budget to match your skill set. But yeah, it's one of those things where also I should mention that there are guilds, I guess, for
Mm,
artists, so you can join artist guilds, and they tend to be very professional and they can give you advice. They can give you, sometimes they have legal advice, they can give you contract advice. Usually, you do have to pay a fee, but it's worth it because you're getting like proper people, people who are really experienced in the publishing sector.
mm,
So that's always helpful. So it's different, depending on what you're going for. If you're a hobbyist, then you might not be interested in sort of a mainstream agent or something like that. So,
mm,
depends on your budget, what you're going for,
mm.
where you are
Well,
in life.
explain a bit about if we have illustrators out there that are wondering, like, hey, that's so cool that you're able to work with some video game mapping.
Mm.
How were you able to get a hold of that? Was that a networking piece or was that an agent piece as
Oh,
well?
that was a fluke. That is very much a fluke. I had got into watching gamers streaming at the height of Among Us popularity. Although actually, I got into watching people streaming games from when Half-Life Alex came out because I'm a big Half-Life fan. So when that came out, there were people who were like, okay, they're playing Half-Life for the first time. So I started watching them because I love seeing people's reaction to playing that game for the first time. And then Alex came out. And then because I've been watching so much gaming content on YouTube, it started recommending, it did its thing with the algorithm. And I started getting recommended like Minecraft and Among Us. So I was following the Among Us streamers. And there's one in particular who's really good. So I started following him and he would live stream on Twitch. So I started following him on Twitch. And one day, watching him on Twitch, he mentioned that he's going to create a map for Among Us because he was he was essentially tired of waiting for Innersloth, who are the creators of Among Us, to come out with a new map. These streamers have been playing the game for like 6 solid months every day, so on the same format. So they were very hungry for a new map. So he was like, you know what, I'm going to make my own map. And then he kind of said, if you're an artist who would like to work on the game, I need artists, it's paid. So I went on his Twitter, saw the posting that he'd made, and I applied. And I kind of dragged my heels a bit with that, actually. I was like, I had some self doubts, let's just put it like that. So I kind of procrastinated on submitting my application. And like 2 weeks had gone by, and I was thinking, oh, he's probably got artists by now. Like he's a big Twitch streamer. He's probably got plenty of professional game artists who have like filled the position. But again, I was watching him and he mentioned, hey, I'm still looking for artists. So I was like, oh, okay. So I applied, and then within 24 hours, I was hired. And I later found out that my application was it was the best one that they had received. So I was like, just goes to show, even if you doubt yourself, submit anyway. You never know. So it was very much a fluke, but I was more than happy to do it because I love video games. Even before I got into comics, my first love artistically was video games. So it was a fun experience. taught me a lot about Photoshop, firstly. I learned a few tricks in Photoshop. And then also, it made me hungry to do more art in video games. I'm kind of
Mm,
working on my own little project on the side. I've got most of the characters I created when I was in my younger years were for games. So I'm kind of doing this little project where I go through all my old characters and then create a full character Bible, character sheets, turnarounds, all that for the video game. Trying pretending that they're actual video games. Like it's a portfolio exercise. But then as I'm doing one of them, I'm beginning to think about, okay, if this was a game, what would it be like? What would the story be? What would the gameplay be like? My younger brother works in video games. I have a friend who he's getting into games. So, down the line, you might have a game from me, one of my own. But I will say, because of that, on Discord, I've joined a lot of groups for game developers. So if anybody is looking to get into doing art for video games, I highly recommend going on Discord. That's how I got into Discord, because when I worked on the game, the guy who commissioned it, he was like, "We're doing it all on Discord." The whole project was managed through Discord.
oh wow.
So I got used to using it. I started joining other groups, and there's quite a few for gamers. So that's probably the best place to go. And the one I recommend the most is called no, Work with Indies. Highly recommend going on there because they actually do interviews with professionals from the gaming industry.
Oh
They
wow.
do art workshops, so you can join in. You can share your projects, share what you're working on, get feedback. They have what they call the co-working hour, where, if you're a freelancer, typically you work from home alone without any feedback. You don't have that office environment. So the idea of the co-working hour is that you can get together with other people and just socialize while working on your individual projects. So highly recommend it.
Oh
Highly
wow.
recommend it. Yeah.
Is that like an international Discord too, or is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's international. Which is kind of a bummer for me because when they do the art workshops, it's usually like 1, 2 a.m. in the morning. And now
Oh,
I've got
for
a
you.
day job. I'm like, oh, I can't stay up anymore. So I can't actually join in, which is like, oh man. But yeah.
But let's talk a bit about what you brought up earlier about you learning more about Photoshop. When we
Hmm.
last talked, you've been pretty solid in doing, like, for instance, your inking work with
Hmm.
actual ink on paper.
Yeah.
Have you been able to? Would your recommendation be for other illustrators out there to kind of expand your toolbox? Have you been able to do
Oh,
that as well?
always. Like
Yeah.
when it comes to your toolbox, always expand it. That's a given. For me, like the last children's book I did, my goal was to do the whole thing digitally.
Wow.
Didn't quite turn out that way, but it was the first time I completely inked um, a project uh, digitally.
Mm.
So, like I said, like you mentioned, when I ink traditionally. So this was the first time I had inked a whole project digitally, which was, oh man, I'm gonna. It was not fun. It was being an inker, like something that would have taken me maybe 7 hours to do. It took me days,
Oh
and it
wow.
was it was very frustrating. And it was the inking bit that was taking the longest. And I'm like, I'm a professional inker. Why is this taking so long? But it was definitely worth it because my God, the reason why I did it digitally is because I wanted it to have a very commercial look.
Mm.
And I felt like the best way for me to get that would be to do it digitally. I wouldn't do that with comics because I feel like with comics, you don't need that super commercial look that you get with like Disney cartoons, let's say. So it's okay to ink traditionally, and I feel like that kind of gives it the personality as well. But when it comes to uh, illustrating for children's book at a commercial level, that kind of, there's a quality to the line that I feel like digital, it gives me that a lot better. So it was a learning experience for sure. I'd still do it again because that's the whole point. But I learned a lot, so hopefully next time it will not take that long. But it was painful at the time.
And do you see yourself now, just when you're working on your own projects, are you seem to be gravitating more towards digital, or are you getting still back to the pencil and paper?
Um, I would still do pencil and paper. Like I said, anything comic related when it comes to inking or pencils will probably be done traditionally.
Okay.
But with my children's book, it will probably be done all digitally. Anything game related is gonna be digital anyway, so that's 100% digital as well. I've always colored digital since 2006, so that's a no-brainer.
Mm,
The only things I would do traditional is the penciling and the inking. But again, with children's book, I'd probably do the whole thing digitally. So.
okay. And how did you see, and was that easier also from the perspective of sending it to the editor that went to the author as well?
Not really, no, because
No?
when you do it traditionally, you're gonna scan it in
Okay.
anyway. I mean, yeah, it cuts out the scanning process. If you don't have a scanner, then it's easier. But for me, it's negligible. It doesn't make much of a difference in
Right.
terms of getting it to the client.
And do you see yourself working as I said, with future children's book illustrators? Do you enjoy the fact that you have that buffer between the author?
I can't say.
Mm,
I've just I'm so used to working through a third party.
right,
However, the author actually did reach out to me to say that she wants to work directly with me. So that's yet to happen. That will be an experience. But I do feel like with working directly with the author, I think I would be able to give more of my creative input.
right,
Because there were things in the script that I had received where it's like, I have experience as a editor working on scripts. So my strength is developmental editing, which is where you're looking at the story, the structure, all that. It's less about the proofreading and grammar, more about the actual story itself. So with that experience, looking at the script, I was like, oh, there are things here that should be changed to make more sense from a storytelling aspect, to make it more impactful. But because I was working through an editor and he was always like, anything that I would say, like, hey, could this be changed? It was always no, no. I couldn't change anything. The author doesn't want it changed, and the client is always right. So I kind of had to just be like, oh, okay. But working directly with the author, at least I think I could have that kind of impact where I say
right,
this needs changing, and also I am experiencing this, so I'm not just talking out thin air. I know what I'm
right,
talking about. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. Should be
right.
interesting. But she seems like a really nice lady, so I'm looking forward to doing more with her.
Generally speaking, how is it different working with a comic book writer as compared to like a children's book writer?
Um, I can't really say because as the inker, I'm sort of like 3 degrees removed from the author.
Mm,
And also because I'm very much work for hire, so there's less collaboration that goes on with my comic work because yeah, I'm just a hire. And again, I don't get the script, I get the pencil, so there's even less for me to say, to input into the story. Sometimes I will say like, okay, but that's more to do if the panel arrangement doesn't make sense, then I'll be like, I don't quite get it. But for the most part, as an inker, I don't have any input on the story itself. I just whatever the pencil gives me, I ink it and it goes on. I don't know in terms of working directly with a comic writer, but I imagine there'll be a lot of similarities, because you're interpreting their script. So there'll be a lot of back and forth, especially as the penciler.
Mm,
You would have more opportunity. Again, it depends, because if you're working for a publisher, you wouldn't be working with the writer directly unless you're
right,
like one of the top professionals in the industry. But if you're sort of a lower level, then you're dealing with the editor, not the writer.
right.
Um, so yeah, I can't say how
But
that.
like you, and because I remember you talking when we talked last time that you were talking about just how important an inker is when it comes to
Mm,
comics. I mean, the inker itself. You give every frame depth and character.
mm,
But to that point, though, how much independence do you say? You know what? I'm just going to make this part more darker than before, like, or
mm.
how much of that do you feel as though that you have to get permission from the artist on that?
That varies from penciler to penciler. So every
Okay.
penciler is different. The penciler I've been working with, um, I worked with him for 3 years. He was very much do what you like. Most of the pencilers I've worked with have been like, do as you please, you know, it's fine.
Right.
But recently I got in contact with another penciler, and he is very specific. So um, I can't do what I like. What I'd normally do is, I have to take his instruction, and I'm very malleable in that way. Like, I don't mind. I'm willing to
Right.
learn and grow. But it depends on the pencil. Some pencils are like, no, 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 this ain't it. Like, you have to do it. I want it to be like this. And again, like some pencils, the way they pencil is very detailed, and the more
Mm,
detailed they are, the less room for interpretation there is on your part, because you're like, okay,
right.
they put a shadow here, I just follow the instructions. Um, but if they're a lot looser with their lines, and maybe they don't add those kind of things, it's really up to you and the penciler to kind of talk it out and say, what does the penciler want? What do they expect of you? What would they like to see? Some of them might say, go for it, add shadows. Some will say, yeah, they just want the line work. They don't want that depth. So it depends. In that case, you'll be dealing directly with the penciler, and
Mm,
they can guide you. When I worked with Dark Horse, I wasn't working with the penciler, but that was the inking on that was dictated by the IP holder, which in my case was 343 Industries, which own Halo, and Fox, which own Aliens. So
mm.
they were the ones that kind of dictated the style of inking they wanted. And
Oh
in
wow.
that case, even the penciler doesn't have a say. Kind of like, this is what the client wants, so we're beholden to the clients. So it varies. It does vary. And it makes it
Right.
interesting. Yeah.
With your experience inking, how has that benefited you as a children's book illustrator?
Not at all. I say that because I am a penciler as well. Like, I don't.
Oh, so when it comes to children's book illustration, how important is it that you have to leave room out for where the words go? And do you already know ahead of time that this block has to be empty, this block, or do you kind of guess as it goes and then the editor says, actually, this has to go like this?
Usually, as the penciler, you have to make room for that. So you have to be
Mm,
conscious that this is where words are going to go. Some pencilers will kind of sketch in where the bubbles should go, because
right.
the pencilers have the script, so they know how much text is going to go within a panel or on a page, and they need to work accordingly. So uh, a bad penciler would kind of ignore or forget that. A good penciler would always remember, okay, got to make room for words. Similarly with the children's book. So this time around, I was actually given the script, and part of my contract was to do the typesetting, so to add in
Okay.
all the words. So I was able to, I think that gave me more flexibility to choose where the words would go. The first book I did with them, I didn't have that knowledge. It was just, okay, let's leave this area of the page free for words. I didn't know how big or small the words were going to be, but this time I did, and I was able to, make account for that. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. Were those parts where they kind of let you make that creative decision?
Yeah. I mean, it is words, so yeah, it's very much. Although, mind you, I've not actually got the final book, so I don't know if they've gone in and changed anything, so that remains to be seen. But for the most part, I decided where things would go. Yeah.
And how important is it as as a professional illustrator as well as to have a wide variety under your portfolio of being a children's book and doing video game maps and doing comic books? How important is that, or do you feel as though the more niche you are, the better you are professionally?
I would say it's not important to diversify. Um, it's just me as an artist. That's how I've expressed myself. I have so
Mm,
many ways of expressing myself that I try them all. And sometimes that's a challenge because you do feel like you're spreading yourself too thin, and so you're not developing enough in areas because, if you're concentrating on one thing, then that's what you're drawing all the time. You can develop a lot quicker and a lot faster in that area.
right,
But because I'm diversifying, I don't have that kind of development that I would like. So that has been a challenge. Um, there are, of course, advantages to diversifying because you can get into a lot of different industries. You can, you have the potential of seizing a lot more opportunities. You can work in films, in cartoons, in games, in comics.
mm,
There's just a lot of areas, but it's not important. If you want to specialize in one area, then absolutely specialize in that area, and you'll still find, clients who want your service. So it's not a problem at all.
right. And so what would be your advice for illustrators to say, definitely make sure you have a portfolio at this page, or definitely make sure that you connect with this group? What would be your advice?
For illustrators advice, I think that's a little bit harder for me to to give advice on because there's just so much advice to
Right,
give. There's nothing more important than having a portfolio. That's a given. So
right,
focusing on that. The important thing for me right now is to find an agent, I think. So I think it's about, finding what works for you. If you feel like an agent would be beneficial, then find an agent. Um, if you feel like you don't need an agent, um, but you want to find work, where to go, there are websites that you can go to showcase your portfolio. So the ones I use are Hire Elo, I think they like to call themselves Hire Elo. And then the other one I think was Cartoon Studio. So if you
okay,
just Google like um, hire uh hire an illustrator, for example, if you just Google that, you'll find a whole list of websites you can go to and hire an illustrator. And then you just go on there and then sign up as an illustrator. So you're not hiring an illustrator, but you're signing up. So you can see what
okay,
comes up in the algorithms, the whole SEO stuff. See what agencies or what websites come up. Have a look at them. Some agents are more specialized in terms of the styles that they represent. So
okay,
find one that your style fits in with. Like if your style is very, let's say, graphic in its style, you're probably not going to fit in with a agent who represents more fantasy, that
right.
very traditional fantasy look. It's hard, I don't know the word to describe the style, but yeah, find agents that represent the style that you do. So
And if people want to find more of your work, where's the best place they can go to?
Instagram is normally where I hang out, although Instagram for artists these days is just a little bit of a nightmare. I'm not gonna lie. I don't like the direction Instagram has gone in, unfortunately. But Instagram, DeviantArt, ArtStation, Twitter. Yeah, I got on Twitter. And I also stream on Twitch. So to find me, it's the Ink Pages or JL Straw, and you'll find me. I'm very easy to find online. So,
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much, JL. This is always a pleasure chatting with you and catching up.
thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Maybe it would have an impact, but I'm an all-round artist, so I've
Oh,
penciled.
hang on,
Oh,
Daddy, hang on, Daddy's in an interview, kiddo. I gotta timestamp this.
okay.
I never get to. Oh, shoot, we got middle
Oh,
child. There's a big middle child crisis going on right now.
oh,
Yeah, poor kid. Yeah. All
oh.
right, let me just go close the door so she
Okay.
doesn't come back in.